Welcome back to A9 Sports. In this video, we'll take an in-depth look at the friendly between Chelsea and AC Milan, a match that Chelsea dominated and ultimately won 3-0. We'll focus particularly on the tactical philosophy used by Xabi Alonso, looking at how his ideas were reflected in Chelsea's structure, positioning, and overall approach throughout the game. Let's start with the formation. Chelsea lined up in a 3-4-2-1, a structure that gave them a solid foundation both in possession and out of possession. So let's take a closer look at how this formation functioned on the pitch and how Xabi Alonso used it to control the game. When Chelsea began their build-up, they consistently formed a 3-2 structure. The back three were supported by Romeo Lavia and Moises Caicedo, who positioned themselves in front of the defensive line and provided additional passing options during the first phase of possession. This structure made it easier for Chelsea to break through AC Milan's press, while also giving them greater control and stability when playing out from the back. Another important advantage of the 3-2 shape was what happened immediately after losing the ball. With 5 players positioned centrally and relatively close to the ball, Chelsea were often in a strong position to counter-press and recover possession quickly. So this was not simply a build-up structure designed to progress the ball. It also gave Chelsea a solid foundation for immediate defensive action after losing possession. As the game developed, Chelsea did not always remain in the 3-2 build-up structure. At certain moments, they shifted into a 3-1 shape, creating a different structure to progress the ball and manipulate AC Milan's defensive line. The key movement here came from one of the two midfielders in the double pivot. Instead of remaining alongside the other midfielder, one of them would drop into the defensive line and position himself between the two center-backs. This movement effectively created a back three, while the remaining midfielder stayed in front of them as the single pivot. But Chelsea did not stop there. Once this back three had been established, one of the original center-backs would often step higher up the pitch. In many situations, this was Josh Akayampong or Joral Hato. This created an interesting positional rotation. The wing-back on that side could move higher and operate more like a traditional wide player, while Akayampong or Hato would occupy the position of a full-back. The purpose of this movement was not simply to change positions. It was designed to create new passing angles and, more importantly, to open spaces between AC Milan's defensive lines. With the wide player providing width, Cole Palmer or João Pedro could then position themselves in the half space, depending on which side Chelsea were trying to overload. But Chelsea had another variation to this structure. Instead of Palmer or João Pedro moving high into the half space, they would sometimes drop deeper. Their objective was to move towards AC Milan's center-backs and create uncertainty about who should follow them. When Palmer or João Pedro dropped, the wing-backs could then move inside and occupy the half spaces. This completely changed the picture for Milan's defenders. If a center-back followed Palmer or João Pedro into midfield, space could open up behind him. If the center-back stayed in position, Chelsea could potentially find their attacking midfielder between the lines. At the same time, the wingback moving into the half space gave Chelsea another passing option closer to the center of the pitch. So rather than using one fixed build-up pattern, Chelsea were constantly changing the positions around the ball. And this is one of the most interesting aspects of Chelsea's build-up under Xabi Alonso. The formation on paper might have been a 3-4-2-1, but the actual structure on the pitch was constantly changing. The players were not simply staying in their starting positions. They were rotating, exchanging positions, creating overloads, and manipulating the opposition's defensive shape. That positional flexibility made Chelsea much more difficult to press and gave them multiple routes to progress the ball into the attacking third. Now let's look at how Chelsea used the 3-2 structure to create space and progress their attacks. If we focus on the same 3-2 shape, but this time pay closer attention to the roles of Cole Palmer and João Pedro, we can see another important tactical detail. When the ball was with the defenders, Palmer and João Pedro would often position themselves close to the half spaces around the midfield line. At the same time, Chelsea's wingbacks, Pedro Neto and Marco Palestra, would stay very wide and close to the touchline. This was important because their positioning stretched AC Milan's defensive structure horizontally. As Chelsea's defenders began to move higher up the pitch and Milan's defensive line also stepped forward, the space between and behind Milan's defenders started to become available. And this is exactly where João Pedro looked to take advantage. With the wingbacks providing width and pulling the defensive structure apart, João Pedro could attack the space left behind the Milan defenders. But what makes this movement particularly interesting is how it was coordinated with the goalkeeper. Let's look at the sequence more closely. When the goalkeeper received the ball, João Pedro would initially drop towards the ball rather than immediately making a run in behind. He would then look towards the defensive line several times, almost checking the position of the defenders and preparing them for what was about to happen. At the same time, his body movement suggested that he was going to continue moving towards the midfield line. This created a small moment of uncertainty for the defenders. The goalkeeper would also use his body orientation to make it appear appear as though he was preparing to play the ball into João Pedro's feet. But this was the interesting part. As soon as João Pedro suddenly changed his movement and attacked the space behind the defensive line, the goalkeeper would immediately recognize the trigger and play the ball into the space João Pedro had just attacked. So, the movement was not simply a normal run in behind. It was a coordinated movement designed to manipulate the defenders first, before attacking the space they had left open. João Pedro would first draw their attention by dropping towards the ball. Then, as the defenders adjusted to his movement, he would suddenly change direction and accelerate into the space behind them. At the same time, the wide positioning of Nido and Palestra made it difficult for the Milan defenders to remain compact. Now, let's move away from open play and look at another area where Chelsea were particularly impressive in this game: set pieces. João Pedro's first goal came directly from a corner, but what made the goal interesting was not simply the finish, it was the way Chelsea organized their players before the ball was delivered. Chelsea sent around 4 players towards the front area of the box, deliberately pulling AC Milan's defenders away and creating space in the area they wanted to attack. This movement created the conditions for their most dangerous player to attack the space with a better 1v1 opportunity. At the same time, Marco Palestra remained deeper, which helped preserve the space and prevented the defensive line from becoming too compact. João Pedro's initial positioning was also important. At first, he positioned himself as if he was going to challenge and occupy the goalkeeper, making it appear that his main objective was to interfere with the goalkeeper's movement. But at the right moment, he changed his movement. Instead of staying close to the goalkeeper, João Pedro suddenly attacked the space that Chelsea had created. He timed his run perfectly, arrived at the delivery point, and met the ball with a powerful finish. Rather than trying to guide the ball with his head, he struck it towards the ground, making the finish even more difficult for the goalkeeper to deal with. The result was a beautiful goal, but more importantly, it showed the level of detail Chelsea had put into their set-piece routines. And there is one statistic from this game that makes this even more interesting. All 3 of Chelsea's goals came from set pieces. That is certainly something worth paying attention to. While one friendly match is not enough to draw major conclusions about an entire season, Chelsea's efficiency from dead ball situations in this game suggests that set pieces could become an important weapon for them this season. With well-designed movements, coordinated runs, and clear responsibilities inside the box, Chelsea showed that they are not relying only on open play attacking patterns to create goals. They also appear to be developing a team capable of competing aggressively through set pieces. And if this level of organization continues, set pieces could become one of Chelsea's most valuable weapons throughout the season. Now, let's look at Chelsea's approach without the ball. When Chelsea moved into their mid-block and low-block phases, they generally used a very similar structure, a 5-3-2. The main objective of this shape was to protect the central areas, particularly the midfield line and zone 14, while making it difficult for AC Milan to play through the middle. Rather than aggressively chasing the ball everywhere, Chelsea focused on maintaining their compact structure and forcing Milan to move possession towards the wide areas. Once the ball was played towards one side, Chelsea would then trigger a coordinated movement. For example, if Milan progressed the ball down Chelsea's left side, the left wingback and the left-sided center back would move across together to engage the ball and close down the space around it. The important detail was what happened in the center. While those 2 players shifted towards the ball, the 2 central midfielders remained positioned centrally, protecting the middle and preventing Milan from immediately playing through the pressure. This allowed Chelsea to defend the wide area without completely opening the central channel. Chelsea's pressing structure was based on a simple but effective principle: protect the center, force the opposition wide, and then use coordinated movements to press the ball on the flank. The 5-3-2 therefore gave Chelsea a compact defensive block while still allowing them to apply pressure when the ball entered the wide zones. This was particularly useful because it reduced the space available in front of the back line and made it difficult for Milan to find clean passes through the central areas. Instead of allowing Milan to play comfortably between the lines, Chelsea tried to control where the opposition could progress the ball, and whenever the ball entered the wide area, the nearest wingback and center back could step out together, creating a 2-versus-1 defensive situation around the ball while the midfield remained protected behind them. This combination of central compactness and controlled wide pressing was one of the key features of Chelsea's defensive approach throughout the game.